Varmt välkomna till denna spännande dag. And we will now change languages. We will start with our perfect, thanks. With the EU perspective in order to get a more international view of what is happening. We used to be a proud little country up in the north where we were always the cutting edge, the role model, and we still are very, very fortunate to be successful in many areas, but not at all where we aim for right now. So therefore we will get a nice overview, and we are delighted to welcome the head of the unit of e-government and trust from European Commission, Mr. Andrea Servida. Welcome. Yes, if you just start at, I'm sorry we are unpolite in the beginning, but if you would just take a temperature of the climate of the digitalization as such, the question, how hot is it now, or is everybody concerned with Great Britain?
I suppose that actually digitalization is one of the positive aspects of being in the EU. Among the policies that we have at the European level, actually, there is no controversy in relation to digitalization. It's an opportunity. But of course, I mean, this is the easy way of playing digitalization. It is hot because it is transforming ourselves, our society. And of course, I mean, changes are on the one hand disrupting and so scaring, but also I would say gives a lot of hopes because the opportunities ahead are much more than the one we have seen so far.
Beautiful. Please fill us in more.
Okay, so good morning to everybody. It's really my pleasure to be here today to address such a crowd. I must say I didn't expect, and I should apologize for not being able to address you in Swedish. Unfortunately, my unit, I don't have any colleague who is fluent in Swedish. I'm not fluent in English either, but nonetheless, I'll try to convey a few messages on what we are doing at the European level in order to bring forward the best that digitalization is indeed delivering to society. I'm an engineer. I've been working for many years at the Commission, perhaps too long. I have a background in research, security research, and then I moved to policy, cybersecurity policies. And then since until, I would say, July this year, I've been in charge of the eIDAS regulation. So I was very glad stepping into the exhibition to see on the right-hand side the booth of eSense and the eIDAS being one of those elements that were somehow portrayed as key for the perspective of the project. So I'm leading this unit on e-government and trust, which is the result of the merge of the activities that we had in the past on e-government, public service digitization, and the eIDAS task force, which I have led for about 5 years. So in this respect, I'm new in the job. This is the second country in Europe that I'm visiting. The first one was Estonia, and I'm glad to start from the top performers because this would allow me on the one hand to understand what is the perspective of those who are going fast, but at the same time they may have some, I would say, few problems in relation to certain aspects of what we are measuring at the European level. But even more importantly, I'm very glad to be here because Sweden has always been very strong supporter of European policies in the area of e-government. I should recall the Malmo Declaration of 2009, which was a seminal contribution to shaping up a policy in this area where, I must say, we don't have the legal basis. We can't harmonize in relation to provision of public services. We can't harmonize in the way in which governments are being transformed. But at the same time, we do all recognize that public services and public sector modernization is key for competitiveness of our society. The Commission put this forward in the context of the digital single market strategy back in 2015. One of the components on which the Commission committed to deliver was indeed to put forward an action plan that will will ensure continuity to the actions that after the Malmo Declaration in 2009 were indeed, I would say, put on the rail by member states with the head of the Commission, and even more importantly, which allowed Europe, and I hope you as a citizen, as entrepreneurs, to benefit from the huge investment which has been made by member states and the Commission, not just in terms of financial resources, projects which have been, I would say, funded like Stork, Store 2, e-Codex, and then we see, I would say, e-Sense even showed here in the exhibition, but even more importantly, the intellectual and the human capital asset which have been developed in Europe and which I think is the strength of our society. What is the vision that we have for the digitalization of e-government services? Is certainly, I would say, to go towards open, inclusive and borderless personalized services. This vision was shaped by my predecessor, Dr. Rowan Mechtel-Rowan, who, by the way, was actually one of the first colleagues that joined the unit where I was back in the 90s, early 90s, when we were both working in the research area of software. And the vision there is for the purpose of, I would say, making possible for public administration to deliver innovation via innovative services and via frictionless type of user experience when accessing such services. Is this something that is going to be, I would say, happening just by technology? Not at all. Technology is just one of the enabling factors. Culture is another one. Human capital is actually the key. And we have indeed to leverage, and you have to be happy to be in a country which in human capitals in the DESI indicators is, I would say, at the very top of the rank. What does it mean, I would say, open government? It means focusing on open data, open services, and open processes, which means transforming the way in which we have somehow perceived, and of course going from north to south, from east to west, you see that the perceptions might still be there of a public administration to be something that is, I would say, very resilient, because it should be resilient, but at the same time not very flexible, not very agile. Actually, agility and flexibility are the main elements that will make public administration to deliver. And delivering means to be putting the users at the heart of the provision of the services, to put the user at the center of the way in which a public administration should function. This is a cultural revolution, but at the same time is an opportunity, because it can, I would say, make everybody to become even more, I would say, active player, proactive player in the way in which our society is shaped up and our society is giving us opportunities. I have about 30 slides, but I'm not going to speak on them all. The first part of the presentation is going to be on the action plan. We'll start with 7 principles, and then I will somehow shed some light on where we where we stand in terms of measuring how good we are doing in Europe, and even more importantly, where Sweden stands in the ranking in Europe. But that is not for blame and shame, but is for you to be even more, how can I say, energized in what you're doing. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, this is not a race. This is a journey. And the journey is as enjoyable as it is convenient and I would say enjoyable by everybody. And of course, I mean, you here in the room and your colleagues, you have a key role to make the journey pleasant for everybody. So, as I said in the action plan, we are somehow bringing forward a number of actions which are for the Commission. Those of you who might have read the action plan, they may be wondering, you know, how come that all the actions are for the Commission? There is nothing for member states, just because of the legal basis. The legal basis is that member states do what is best for their jurisdiction, for their citizens, for their entrepreneurs, for their companies, but at the same time, they are part of a union. And in this respect, of course, I mean, the citizen of Sweden is the citizen of Europe. It should have equal opportunities, even more opportunities, by the fact that indeed he is a citizen of Europe. In this respect, the action plan is somehow providing a number of principles which have been endorsed by the Council in the Council conclusion of September the 20th, so just less than a month ago. The Council endorsed the action plan and endorsed these principles. These principles may seem to be obvious to those who are working in the area since many years, but at the same time they are not, if you project them in a cross-border dimension. Perhaps at national level, regional level, local level, you might be lucky or you might be experiencing the implementation of those principles in what is offered to you or the way in which you're providing services, being part of a public administration to your society. But I can tell you that going across the regions and the countries in Europe, these principles do not apply in the same way. Just to give you an example, the once only principle, which is key to put at the heart of the provisioning, the user, the citizen, the enterprises, is in legislation already there since years in more than 20 countries. Is this working? I'm not sure. I come from Italy, I'm Italian, and I was surprised myself to find that indeed the once only principle is in our legislation, because of my experience with the public administration until, I would say, a few years ago at least, it has never been of the same nature that I might see is the experience that you may have here in Sweden or in other countries in the north of Europe. So the principles there are key because they are the lighthouse of, they provide the lighthouse for the implementation of the action plan, which means they bring the perspective to what is indeed considered to be contributing to deliver the vision and to deliver those objectives, in particular competitiveness, agility, flexibility, and frictionless user experience, which are at the heart of the action plan. What is the action plan? How the action plan is organized? Three main components. Which to some extent are reinforcing the engagement and the commitment to go towards more, I would say, user-centric or citizen-centric type of service provisioning. The first pillar is about modernizing public administration. Or putting in place
Vi har en lång lista nu på vad vi har vunnit och det är väldigt positiva saker. Dialog, medborgarmakt, snabbhet, transparens,
where a head project was about, I would say, software development, which could be thought of as a kind of technical domain, but actually the cultural dimension, the way in which communication is managed, and communication not just in terms of chatting, but in terms of conveying the values, conveying the message, conveying the requirements, conveying the feedback in terms of what is being delivered, is much richer than what we may think could be delivered by a piece of technology. This is where we see under the first pillar of modernization, key component to be at disposal of the member states. Of course, member states do retain their sovereignty to decide how to best digitize, how to best, I would say, digitally transform their public administration, the way in which the interactions between public administration and societies are realized, but at the same time, the cross-border dimension is there. The integration, the interoperability, the seamless user experience should be there, disregarding whether I'm getting access to services at the local, regional, national, or transnational, I would say, level. And in this respect, of course, the Commission is working very much on the European interoperability framework, which is indeed a reference framework, not to be imposed, but which is put, is made, I would say, is at the disposal of the member states and the party in the member states to work towards a seamless interoperability across nations. The second pillar is about cross-border, and the cross-border goes back to the principle that you might have seen in the earlier slides of cross-border by default. Why? Because I mean, in a society that is global, in a society where digital is transforming the way in which we can really enjoy our own creativity and we can deliver value to society. And mobility is not just a physical mobility, it's a mental mobility, is, I would say, associated to the possibility to have access to services and access to opportunities everywhere in the world. And of course, I mean, the cross-border should, by definition, be fading away in Europe, because it should be like a continuum that would, in the digital, be very much realizable by the technology, but perhaps less by process and procedures. The third one is about the digital interaction. The digital interaction goes in the dimension of how we're shaping up, how we are governing the digital transformation, bringing at the center of the picture the user and the way in which a frictionless user experience should be delivered. In this respect, of course, I mean, a lot is made by the way in which we I would say, think of the provisioning of the services not as a kind of one-way direction, but as an opportunity to engage with our counterparts in provisioning services which are really tailored to their needs. So in terms of keywords, I think I went the wrong way, yes. In terms of keywords, I think that the three pillars do correspond to digital and enable, which is digitization, connect, which is indeed the cross-border, and then of course engage, because by engaging the parties, then of course we will be able to deliver even more quality and value to our society. I'm not going to go through all the actions. We do have 20 actions in the action plan. You can see that the actions here are of very different nature. For instance, in the first pillar to the left, you can see that accelerating the take-up of eIDAS, so electronic identification trust services. And in this respect, I should acknowledge the I would say, key contribution of Sweden in the negotiation of the eIDAS regulation on cross-border recognition of electronic identification trust services, and the commitment of Sweden to make these, the rolling out of this regulation an opportunity for the society to benefit from more secure, trustworthy, transparent access to services. But you see also there action in relation to e-procurement, because business is extremely important. We have to make sure that the system that we are, on which we are investing since years, are going to be operationalized for the purpose of serving society. But also we have, I would say, more underpinning type of development with the continuation of the adoption of the Connected European Facilities digital service infrastructure component, the e-delivery, the e-signature, the ID, that are somehow at the heart of the way in which interoperability could be built at the European level. But as for me, somehow, or I would say, often we forget to do what we preach. You might have seen that the action number 20, so to the very right of the picture, is about the Commission being transformed digitally. This, I think, is the biggest challenge, because I mean, I see the environment. When I joined the Commission in '93, the first project that I've seen showed in the Commission on electronic signature was in '96. Okay. So 20 years later, we are about to go for it. Okay. Anyway, so what is the new action plan is indeed, I would say, to transform the way in which we work with society, is to make the administrative burden to go down and to make everybody to really benefit from what is an asset, because public administration is an asset, is a resource, is not a burden. We should turn culturally the approach that a public administration, dealing with public administration, is about wasting time. Public administration could indeed be, and often, I would say, are a source of information and of data that could really make the difference in the way in which we do operate in society. And of course, I mean, if you are very agile, very flexible, very efficient in integrating the public services with the other economic and social processes of our society, then of course, I mean, we can have a chance to renew competitiveness, to be more competitive and to be even more empowered in making our creativity to deliver higher value, more value to society. But of course, I mean, we have to be inclusive. So this is why, for instance, the principle digital by default, we have not to overlook the fact that digital by default means that that is the preferred option. But because society is made of citizens, and citizens are on equal footing vis-à-vis the rights and obligations towards the governments and public administration, we have to make sure that everybody is accompanied with the pace that is appropriate, but without complacency. We cannot, I would say, wait too much for things to be transformed. And this is where, indeed, the digital by default as preferred option is indeed very, very key. But is this, the 20 action, is everything that we foresee in the digital action plan? Not at all. In the e-government action plan, not at all. The action plan is actually, for the first time, a very dynamic framework where the member states, by leveraging, by being mobilized around the initiative that the Commission and beyond what the Commission has put forward, but still in the light and consistently with the principles set and the objectives set by the action plan, could indeed organize themselves and come forward with projects that indeed would be worth pursuing, and under which we, as a Commission, we can mobilize intellectual and financial resources with the framework, funding framework that are available in the European level to support member states, to support communities to move toward digital and to make digital their life. In this flow chart, you see what is the decision process. What I think is important is not in itself the chart, but the fact that on a regular basis we will be working with representatives of the member states, including, of course, Sweden. The first meeting that we had with the member states to decide how to update the action plan took place on the 28th of September, so a couple of weeks ago in Bratislava, was the kickoff of the e-government action plan steering board, and this mechanism is a mechanism to ensure inclusiveness and governance. The Commission has, of course, I would say, a duty to do what it preaches, but at the same time, those who are reaching out, people, citizen, public enterprises, are governments, are regional administration, local administration. And that is where the Commission is indeed, I would say, working with the member states to make sure that indeed the way in which we will reach out to you and your compatriots in any region of Europe will indeed be efficient, because at the end of the day there is much more to learn from one each other than perhaps what is indeed to waste to talk to each other. What is the main tool to engage? I've said that the governance tool that is the steering board, but there is also an open platform, a stakeholder engagement platform that is e-government for EU, which is at the disposal of all the stakeholders to gather what? To gather ideas, to gather needs, to gather experiences, to share indeed what works and doesn't work in relation to what we are doing, we are planning, we are rolling out, because at the end of the day it's only via a continuous loop of information gathering and feedback that we can really progress in the direction that we want to pursue. Is this all in relation to operationalizing what we know today? No, not at all. We should seed into the future. Seeding into the future means research, and this is why we do have also a framework under the Horizon 2020, which is really very much focusing on a number of initiatives, in particular focusing on co-creation, co-design, co-development, because at the end of the day, the provisioning of services should engage and make parties to become responsible equally responsible for the delivery of the service. And this is because it's going to make the provision much richer, much more tailored to what are the needs, and more efficient. Of course, I mean, if you don't know what we are doing, if you can't measure what we are doing, it would be difficult to understand how we are progressing well. And this is why I would like now to give you just a few information on a few things. First, the very newborn baby that we have, that is the benchmark 2016 report that was published by the Commission at the beginning of October. The benchmark is an activity which is engaging member states since a few years, and on a number of top-level indicators which aim at shedding light on what works and how we can learn from one another. This is not about blame and shame, but it's about bench learning. It's about seeing from what indeed we gather as experience in member states, what we may ourselves in our administration, in the way in which we work with our administration, bring positive element to our work. And of course, I mean, again, it focuses very much on elements which are going to be regularly updated, and for the next round, of course, we will have even more important components in relation to mobile friendliness and digital by default, in order to align the benchmark reporting to what are indeed the key principles of the action plan. We should understand that this benchmark has a timeline of a bit longer than a year, which means that indeed, I would say, when things are put on the rail, they take the snapshot of what is the situation in terms of policy recommendation, policy statement, when indeed the things are launched. But then upgrading during the process is a bit difficult. This is why for the next benchmarking, we are even making more effort to bring more coherence between what is indeed that we have at the European level and in terms of policy priorities, and the benchmarking that we are going to be conducting in 2017. This is, I would say, the snapshot of where indeed we stand at the European level. What we have somehow as the focus of the benchmark is about user centricity, which is key in the action plan, transparency, cross-border delivery, and of course key enabling factors, in particular the adoption of those of the result of huge investment made by member states and the Commission in relation to digital service infrastructure component like EID, signature, delivery, and the rest. The benchmark, of course, is something that is, I would say, very much focusing on an approach which is based on the experience, and this is why the mystery shopping approach is what is predominant. But certainly what I think is key, and that was also one of the elements that was whispered to my ears as the focus of my presentation, is certainly the Digital Economy and Society Index, which is a composite indicator which gives a bit of the snapshot where countries stand in relation to 5 important areas: connectivity, human capital, use of internet, integration of digital technology, and, not surprisingly, digital public services. I think that these DESI Index are extremely valuable because they contribute to highlight where member states may indeed contribute. Of course, I mean, we do have a vested interest in relation to the indicator on digital public services, which is somehow represented here in terms of the scope. But what I think is important is if you are interested, and perhaps you know even better than I do, because you might be more experienced in the domain, where the information about your country and where the information about the other countries in Europe can be found. And these are where are the links and the type of reports that you can access to understand where indeed how your country is doing, which is in a nutshell is somehow somehow represented here. Of course, I mean, in terms of DESI, Sweden is one of the top performer. And of course, I mean, since a while is in the top 3. Of course, I mean, this doesn't mean that Sweden is doing well in all, or very well, or in an excellent way in all the different indicators. In particular, in relation to digital public service, the performance is still being in the top is actually not at the very top as it is overall, and that is an area where indeed the country, I know, is very responsive. After this meeting I will be seeing colleagues from relevant ministries to discuss indeed what is indeed the Euro that Europe is offering and is making possible for Sweden to leverage in the effort they are making to move even higher in the rank in this area, but being well above of the average, I know that is not sufficient for you, and I'm glad to be in a country where being well above the average is not sufficient, because it means that there is not just a competition spirit, but even more importantly, there is the full realization that has always been there in Sweden that digital is a key opportunity, and a key opportunity is a growth opportunity. And growth is not just economic growth, it's societal growth. And there is where indeed we all have to learn from what you're doing in the country. I think that, you know, I'm not going to delve too much into the individual ranking, or I would say the ranking of Sweden in relation to the different e-government public service related indicators. You can see yourself where you stand. What I think I would highlight very much is that in terms of human capital, you are at the top. And I think that that is where I think it makes the difference. If I were to say, you know, what is indeed as an official, the higher potential is of course in human capital. Having people that are indeed at the top in terms of percentage of ICT skilled, the percentage of professionals that can really contribute to operationalize the vision of digitizing society, it makes, I would say, Sweden to be in a very privileged situation. Of course, I mean, nothing comes without cost, and this is the result of huge investment that we have made, and I can only say to keep going in this direction. So, what I can say in relation to the way forward, keep up do the good work. There are new opportunities on the open data, because as you might have seen, in the open data is the only place where Sweden is below average, European average, but I think that this is easily fixed, because I mean you have a culture of openness and public sector information reuse, which I think would make it very easy for you to move forward. And then of course, I mean, because the action plan is there, we would very much like all the effort that are going to be made by the country to move in the direction of rolling out the principle, and even more importantly, contribute to make the flexible arrangement that we have in place to become an opportunity for progress at the European level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Please, if you want to take the opportunity to ask questions, write them down in text it. Would you please, Linda, put that sign up where we just show the how to ask questions. That means that we should be proud, but as you say, not complacent. What would you then recommend us for the open data? What do you identify as the obstacles in our attitudes to perform better there?
To be very, very open.
Yes, please.
I think I will discover this after this meeting, because as I said, I'm going to see the responsible officials in the ministries.
Yes.
Certainly, open data is a challenge for everybody, and I think it is to be contextualized in the way in which the administration works and the way in which the data are made readily available. Certainly the possibility to leverage enabling elements like electronic identification to access data and to build on those elements to make even more easily or I would say much easier the possibility to crunch data within and outside the public administration, which means opening the processes so that provisioning of services could also be offered by players outside the public administration is certainly the way forward. But of course, I mean, as I said, I know that in each and every country, the way in which the state is organized varies very much, and the structural differences are equally important as the, I would say, cultural differences. And there is where I think that in terms of real, I would say, understanding of the situation, I would prefer, I would say, to have first the conversation with the colleagues.
Thank you. We did mention in the beginning that, of course, there is a growing threat also as for the cyber attacks that start becoming more frequent. And, of course, there is a lot of contradiction in the conflicting interests all the time with integrity and with safety and all of that. How much do you talk about the vulnerability in the Commission when you, and how to prevent damages?
Cybersecurity, I would say, it goes back to something that we are very experienced in the physical world, which is risk management. I tell you something. Until 2005, I was in charge of research in the area of safety critical systems, security, security of databases, and then I moved to policy. And I remember that the first communication that I worked on was the communication on Secure Information Society in 2006. And when we went to the council, I think there was the representative of Sweden who pointed to us that indeed we were talking about protection of critical information infrastructures, the risk, the threats scenarios which was developing, so not very much different from what is now, even though the scale was different. But he says, you know, risk management is the key.
Yes.
Because risk management is the way in which you can really engage everybody to take the measures. And this is where, at the European level, we have, I would say, made quite a lot of progress. We have the NIS directive, which has just been published and is going to be applicable soon. We have launched a cyber security public-private partnership because there is no single party alone that will work on vulnerability. And last but not least, you have seen that trustworthiness is one of the principles in the action plan. So it's very high on the agenda, but there is more to do. And we have to bring, I would say, in the context of risk management, the perspective of the need-to-know basis as the paradigm for data to be exchanged. You know, because with IT, it's very easy to collect data, but when you have data collected, then you have a potential threat.
So risk management being one of your specialties. Absolutely. Yes, thank you for that. And how about open standards? This is a question from the audience. What can we expect from the revision of
End of the year. We are working on a new communication, and there will be, by the end of the year, a new proposal for a European interoperability strategy and a renew European interoperability framework. So in a couple of months at the latest, it should be adopted by the Commission.
Thank you. And here's a question. Where does Europe stand in... where does Europe stand in relation to digital... No, I'm sorry, why doesn't it show? I will try again. Where does, anyway, sorry about that. Where does Europe stand? This is really safety, risk management. We don't expose any questions. Where does Europe stand in relation to digital transformation in a global context?
Oh, I think that, you know, that is an excellent question, because at the end of the day, interoperability, I mean, standards means interoperability. Interoperability means standards. There is no interoperability without standards. And even more important, I think that, you know, if I just focus on what I know best, that is electronic identification, Europe has shown that we can have a seamless use of trustworthy identification, authentication, credential in a federated model which is based on open standards and interoperability. So not for one single solution which dictate how things are happening. This is why standard is high on the agenda. In the package that was adopted by the Commission on digitizing European industry, there is a communication on ICT standards priorities, which has a component, an international component, because if we think of IoT, for instance, which is going to be an extremely important element of the way in which future public services will be provided, because sensing the world is a way of, I would say, making the provisioning is even better, but sensing the world doesn't mean going for big brothers, means being able to capture the data that we are entitled to capture and to crunch the data that we are entitled to capture. So in this respect, the Commission is very much pushing the agenda at the international level, in particular in those areas like IoT, big data, cloud, because I mean, without interoperability, without standardized solution at the global level, it would be difficult for us to go for the opportunities to our stakeholders, because this is about growth. It's not about technology, it's about growth, economic, business, societal growth.